So with that, are you ready for rapid fire, Trevor?
Yes, sir.
Let's do it then. So, give me one bold prediction for Notre Dame this season.
You got it. Bold prediction. I think Riley Leonard is going to have over 3,400 total yards of offense to himself by the end of the year. So I broke it down. Right now, he's on pace to have 1,800 passing yards. And if rushing stays the same, he's on pace to have about 898. I think Notre Dame's passing game is a lot closer than what some people might think that it is. And it's slowly starting to get there. I think if they can focus on getting receivers more focused on yards after the catch and letting their playmakers go be playmakers, that's going to make the stat sheet look a little better for Riley Leonard. So I think his passing game average goes up over these next 7 games, and I have him at 3,400 total yards of offense to close out the year.
3,400 total yards. I like that. That would be a pretty solid season for a quarterback. And the touchdown numbers are going to end up looking pretty good there as well. Mine also has to do with Riley Leonard, but I've got somebody else combined in there with him. My bold prediction is that both of those guys are going to be right around 1,000 rushing yards at the end of the season. You talked about the pace that they're on. So for them to get there, they would have to perform over that pace the rest of the way. But I think just the way this offense is built and the fact that they have a bye week this week. They play 3 games and then they get another bye week. I think that's going to be key for a guy like Riley Leonard to be able to rest up and to continue to be able to play that style of football the entire way. So I think when all is said and done, Riley Leonard is going to have a career high rushing year, and his previous career high was just under 700 yards at Duke a couple of years ago. And I think that he and Jeremiah Love are both going to be threatening the 1,000-yard mark on the ground this season.
I like that.
I like how we both had a Riley Leonard related in there.
Yeah.
Like it had to be bold. If I guess it had to be Riley Leonard if it was going to be bold, right?
Had to.
Okay, so we're going to do – I've got a list of the position coaches for Notre Dame. We're going to go underrated, overrated, or properly rated for each of them. I'm curious to see how the chat fires up here when we talk about each of them to see what they think as well. But we'll start with the running back coach, Deland McCullough. Is he underrated, overrated, properly rated?
Okay, so let me ask you this real quick before we dive in here.
Okay.
Are we talking over like to us as fans or how like nationally they are viewed as coaches?
Ooh. I think it is more like here.
Okay.
In the fan base, because I think that nationally, I don't think these guys are nearly as well known as like what the fan base thinks of them.
Fair enough. So if we're going just on the fan base, I think Deland McCullough, I think that he is properly rated. I think he is one of the position coaches at Notre Dame that has a lot of respect amongst the fan base, especially given what he's done with what he did with Estime and with Diggs and what he did with Estime last year, what he's doing with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, and what he's been doing developing some of the younger guys as well. I think he's properly rated amongst the fan base.
That's how I put him as well. It would be hard, I think, to underrate him, but because of everything that he has done since coming in the door, not just developing these guys and getting them to play like the standard that he holds these guys to. If you look nationally, I think he's probably vastly underrated. Now that might like in terms of a media, like a national media standpoint, if you were just going the coaching profession, because he does have that connection to Kansas City and all that stuff. And, he's probably going to blow up here again pretty soon because, I know he's got a book coming out. Sarah Spain, who used to be at ESPN, worked on a book with him, and I think it's supposed to be coming out maybe this winter or next spring or something like that. So I'm sure he's going to have a lot of attention coming back on him as well. But I think for right now, in these circles, he is properly rated, probably underrated on the national perspective, though. Yep. I guess you can probably give both if you want. Now, this next one is going to be a lightning rod. Defensive line coach Al Washington.
As far as the fan base is concerned, and I'm sure I'll probably catch some heat for this, hear me out on this one, guy. I think he's underrated based on what he has done with the defensive line this year. Gabriel Rubio's hurt. Boubacar Traore is now hurt. Jordan Botelho is hurt. And I think what he's been able to do to get some of those young guys ready, I think is something that can't be overlooked. I understand a lot of the gripe with how Riley Mills and Howard Cross have been playing to start the year, but I don't know if that's on coaching, because if I look at the defensive line room as a whole, what everybody always tells me is that when it's one or two players, it's on the players. When it's everybody, it's the coaching staff. So I don't know if it's just something internally that Mills and Howard Cross have to get worked out, because they had their best game of the season so far against Louisville. Hopefully that trend continues to move up. But Junior Tuihalamaka is playing at a higher level. Boubacar Traore was playing really well before he got injured. Jordan Botelho was having a bounce back year. Bryce Young and Logan Thomas were both ready to play when they were young. So I'm going to say underrated based on how the fans view him. Now, that is not me staking the claim that he's just one of the best defensive line coaches in the country.
Right. That's the key. But I think he's underrated as well, because like some of the things that you mentioned, before Jordan Botelho was injured, he was off to a career, he was en route to having a career year. And so he's injured. Boubacar Traore steps up, and look at what he's doing. Okay, like Decaf is saying, RJ is bad. Well, he came from another system, and he's in year 5 coming over from Duke. Like, look at Javonte Jean-Baptiste, same type situation, same type body, less experience even. And look at what he turned into. He got drafted and he's playing in the NFL right now. Javonte Jean-Baptiste would not have been drafted and probably would not be in the NFL if he had stayed at Ohio State last year. The Mills and Cross thing is like, look, as much, again, like your expectations for those guys, I think kind of sets the standard. And the fact that they are even here this deep into their career still says something about them, and I don't mean that necessarily as a pejorative. I'm just saying, like, it's not that much different than Sam Hartman. Like, Sam Hartman ultimately had to stick around for a 6th year in college because what was the other option for him? And like Vince and I were talking about yesterday, kind of turned out that his ability to read defenses probably had as much to do with why he was still in college and wasn't going to get drafted the year before, right, as anything. Like, there's like all of these guys that stick around that long, especially when they have produced, if they really felt like they could have, started their NFL careers a year ago, they would have done so, but they decided to come back. Now, NIL factors into it and all those different things. But I guess my point is, like, Josh Burnham, Jordan Botelho, Boubacar Traore, all of those guys were really blossoming before their injuries occurred. And, like, are there issues in the interior? Sure. But some of that also has to do with, like, guys just aren't ready to go, apparently. Yeah. If they, because like someone was asking, DK was asking Sean Sevillano and, all these, I get it. Armel Mukum, like, you would want them to be showing you more at this point, but they're still relatively young interior defensive linemen, and some of them just aren't ready to go at that point in their career. So, again, I'm not saying that Al Washington is like the best defensive line coach in the country, but I am saying when you sit back and look at the production he was getting out of some of these young guys before their injuries, I do think that he is at least slightly underrated based on what most people think of him.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That, and once you factor in that he's getting two freshmen ready to play in Logan and Bryce Young. I mean, Bryce Young was not expected to have this kind of workload.
Bryce Young, another good one. Yeah, and Logan, look at how both of those guys played last week. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Tuihalamaka. He's playing pretty well so far also. So, I mean, again, everyone wants to point the blame at a coach because a player's not ready, but sometimes it's on the player too. And, and it's also, again, it's not like it has to be like you're to blame for this. Sometimes you're just not ready, whether it's physically, mentally, whatever it happens to be. Sometimes you're just not ready to go yet, and you need to continue to develop that. Again, that's part of why you have guys who stick around for 4 and 5 years and aren't drafted yet.
Yeah, and it's one of those that you can't with a coach like Al Washington. I understand that he's a very polarizing coach for fans to have opinions of, but it can't just be, you can't just live on one side. So there is some validity to that comment. I agree with you, but it can't just be, well, look at the guys that he didn't get ready. But it also can't be, well, look at the guys he did get ready. It's you kind of have to take the in between. It's a little bit of the gray area, but that is why I think he's underrated in terms of how Notre Dame fans view him. Because I would make the argument that I think the majority of Notre Dame fans don't think very highly of Al Washington. And I think so far this year, with the cards that he's been dealt with injuries, I think he's done a relatively decent job.
Yeah. Again, it has been a little bit mixed, but there have been, the guys that we rattled off there who have developed and who were playing at a really high level before they were injured. And I think probably the biggest thing that impacts people's opinion of him is just the recruiting, because you do have to start getting some more, big hits with these guys, not to mention bigger bodies, but they need a bigger hit rate with some higher rated guys to step in here and be able to compete. How about cornerbacks coach Mike Mickens?
I'm going to say he's properly rated as far as how Notre Dame fans view him, because if you're anybody like me, I think extremely highly of Mike Mickens. Yeah, from a national perspective, I think that you could go he's underrated and not talked about as much to start getting defensive coordinator looks. But I look at what he's done with the development of Ben Morrison and the development of Christian Gray, and last game especially with what he was able to do, because he's also like the defensive pass game coordinator. When Ben Morrison left the Louisville game, you had a true freshman in Leonard Moore starting the game because Christian Gray couldn't go. You move Jordan Clark to field side corner. You have Rod Hurd come in and play a little nickel / safety, which he hasn't done a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
And they still performed really well. I'm really high on Mike Mickens. I agree, Brent. Mike Mickens is outstanding. And for me, I think he is at the very least properly rated. And you could
it may be even underrated, just because, because every year, like when Benjamin Morrison had to, became a starter as a freshman, and look at the development of a guy like Cam Hart, who started off his career as a wide receiver. And then the guys you mentioned, the fact that they played a big chunk of last week's game without Christian Gray, Benjamin Morrison, and Jaden Mickey, who were going into last week the top 3 cornerbacks on the roster. And they played, without, 2 of them for the entire game and without 3 of them for big chunks of the game. So I think for the most part, he's properly rated, but I still think you could go underrated. And, like you said earlier, this is a guy who is going to be sought after in terms of becoming a defensive coordinator here pretty soon.
Oh, yeah.
So going back to the defensive line, Steven was asking, curious our take on whether in principle you would want a nose tackle who eats blocks more than Cross and Heinisch. And I think he had another comment, or somebody else had a comment, or obviously you want bigger bodies than Cross and Heinisch playing that nose. It's not, to me, it's not quite as vital when you're playing with 4 defensive linemen as opposed to if you were playing with a 3-4, then, you would obviously just want the most massive body you could have in there, that you could have if you're playing with that. But I think everyone would like to see someone who is at least 300 pounds, if not, in the 320 pound range as your minimum playing in there if possible.
I think I think the size depends on what you're asking them to do. So, Steven, I agree with, if you were going to ask them to just eat and take on blocks to let linebackers scrape over top and run fit, I wouldn't mind seeing a bigger guy in there, which is why the injury to Gabriel Rubio might have been a little bit more impactful than what some of us might have thought at the start of the season. But I go back and think one of the best interior defensive lineman Notre Dame has had in the last decade was Sheldon Day. And Sheldon Day was 6'1", 285 when he was at Notre Dame. So he was not somebody that was that 6'3", 330-pound guy that you see, at some of those schools that you were mentioning in the chat, like the, Georgias, the Alabamas of the world. So I hear where you're coming from. I think it depends on what you're asking them to do.
Well,
right?
Sheldon Day, part of what made him so good, he had the high school wrestling background, and he was a state champion high school wrestler, and so he had that leverage and agility as well as the result of that really helped him out. So like you could be a little bit more undersized doing what Sheldon Day was doing, but he had a different kind of explosiveness, different kind of agility in there as well.
I agree. I mean, it's just one of those things where it just all depends on what you're asking them to do. I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, they don't weigh enough, that's why they're not playing well.
Yeah.
I think it's what you're asking them to do. Howard Cross and Donnie Heinisch are two guys that are quick off the line of scrimmage, and they're twitchy. And the strength of their game is not eating blocks from a 335-pound offensive guard, right? Because on the flip side of that coin, somebody that's been under scrutiny a lot this year has been Riley Mills, who is almost a 300. I mean, he's 6'5", 297. You have Jason Onye in there, who's another 6'5", 295-pound guy. So I get where you're coming from there, but I think there's a little bit more to it than just size, but a bigger defensive interior line is not, I'm never going to be opposed to it.
Joe Rudolph, underrated, overrated, properly rated. Before you answer, there is no correct answer on this one, Trevor.
Yeah, if we're going based on...
This is a no-win situation for us to answer this question at this point.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, based on how, like, what Notre Dame fans think, I think he's properly rated. Notre Dame fans don't think that highly of him. Now, I think that there are some extenuating circumstances this season, right? Because of the amount of injuries that are on the offensive line, with the season starting out with your starting bona fide left tackle getting injured for the entire season. So I'm going to go properly rated just on like what his, I guess you could say, reputation is. You could even make the argument for underrated, but...
See, I'm going to go properly just because, like, there's no way that he's overrated.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's any way that he's underrated either, just based on the performance of the line. I mean, he's only been here for 2 years, and he obviously inherited 2 really good tackles last year. And there were some mixed results with what happened in the interior. But again, like, you had first-time starters out there who were kind of breaking in last year. And then just to go back to everything that we've talked about with this year's offensive line, it's like, I feel like a broken record at this point, but 4 of the 5 starters were number 2 on the depth chart at some point before they ended up becoming starters. And obviously 3 of them out there right now. Well, 4 of them, all 4 of them because of injuries are why. And, like, how about the fact that Emil Wagner has played pretty good? Like, that's part of Joe Rudolph's evaluation too, right? A first-time starter who's playing really well over there at right. I'm not calling him an elite tackle by any means, but he's played really well, especially for a first-time starter this year. So I think Rudolph is properly rated. Like, the better grade, as a couple of people have said, is probably incomplete. I really think it is incomplete because I do want to see him with, because like next year's line, no matter what, because of everyone who's had to play at different points this season, everyone's going to have a lot more experience next year. So I know nobody wants to wait a year before we have to make these judgments. And then, a lot of people think that we'll be having the same conversations over and over again. But Jeff says we're digging in deep with it. I'm not defending him. I'm just saying, how can you properly judge a guy when 4 of the 5 guys on the line are not the starters that were supposed to be the starters when the season started? Like, how can you judge the guy based on that?
It's just too early. I mean, he was, you could make the argument that Joe Rudolph was helped out by inheriting a guy in Joe Alt who was already coming in. but it's just too early to say. Injuries make it really tough to gauge. And I think the line overall, it needs correcting. Sean and I are not saying that the offensive line is perfect, and there's no issue with the offensive line. There's a lot of things that need correcting. But for the cards that have been dealt, Riley Leonard's been sacked 5 times in 5 games. I mean, it's tough to say that Joe Rudolph is doing an abysmal job when the sample size is just too small. So I would agree it's either properly rated or just,
See, I don't get this one. He had one generational O-line that underperformed and one injured young line that's been bad. I mean, Joe Alt himself didn't underperform. He was the generation, like if you're, calling him a generational talent, and, Blake Fisher on the other side, like you had those two guys, and then, again, then you had Zeke Correll in the middle. There's a reason Zeke Correll left to go to NC State, and then you had 2 new starters at guard. So I don't really consider last year's line a generational line by any means. Like, you had a really good talent at left tackle and a pretty good talent at right tackle, but I wouldn't say generational.
Yeah, I agree. I'm with you.
Linebacker coach Max Bullough.
Underrated. I don't think enough people are talking about Max Bullough and the job that he's done so far. I mean, painting the picture, he took over as linebackers coach in February of this year after losing J.D. Bertrand, Maris Leafau. And so there was a lot of question marks. You were going to have a good amount of first-time starters in your linebacking core. And so far, and Brian and I talked about this in the 1 o'clock show, the linebackers have improved game over game over game. And I think that's a testament to coaching, and they're getting a lot more comfortable in the scheme that they're running. So they're starting to play a lot faster. So I think Max Bullough is really underrated in how he got, Drake Bowen was not a starter at linebacker before the season, got him ready to start at Mike linebacker. Kingston Viliamasa is a true freshman, and now he's competing at a high level. Jaden Osbury is performing well. Jack Kaiser's playing a new position. I think that he's not talked about enough, so I'm going to go underrated.
I'm just glad that we can talk about someone other than one of the lightning rod coaches. Max Bullough, I will say underrated as well. And if you would have asked me during training camp, I might have said overrated just because everyone loved him and, sat there like a Labrador every time he said anything, just because of how fast he talked, and he would throw in a few, curse words and whatever else and just get everybody fired up. He's definitely old school football. That's like Jeff says, very, very solid old school dude. And, just everything you said, the way he's got these young guys to play, because, again, like anytime we've mentioned some of these players, they'll say, well, he was a 5-star guy or he was a 4-star, so it's like assumed that these guys are supposed to be able to come in. But, the players still have to have the aptitude to do it. And the fact that they have cross-train these guys at different positions, and you really just have not seen much drop-off at all in that linebacker unit. And remember, this is the first time that he's been a full-time assistant coach. He was still he was still coaching them up and running the room for the most part last year, but he was still grad assistant, so this is really still year 1 for him. So definitely underrated for me.
Yep. 100%.
Last one, receivers coach Mike Brown. To me, this is honestly the hardest one.
I wrote down notes before the show, and I have a question mark next to his name because I
know.
I mean, if we're going to go the route that Joe Rudolph sample size is too small, I think you got to throw Mike Brown into that category as well. And that's kind of where I'm at with it, because I don't know how to rate him, if I'm just being honest. I don't want to say that he is underrated. I don't really think you can say that he's overrated either, because those two things is the sample size is just way too small. And you compound that with the issues of, the offensive line not giving Riley Leonard enough time in pass protection, Riley Leonard having issues with accuracy. I don't know if you can gauge how well the wide receivers have played. I will say from a blocking standpoint, the wide receivers have played really well, and it's a significant improvement from last year. With this one, I just don't know how to rate him. What do you think?
No, I completely agree with that. And, I've seen people like jury still out, TBD, all that kind of stuff. It's like the thing about the receivers is the quarterback obviously plays a huge part in it. And when the quarterback has started pulling the trigger a little bit more
Mhm.
in the last couple of weeks, we've definitely started to see more out of these guys. And, and when he wasn't pulling the trigger, we obviously saw times where they were open. And so we knew that they were doing, at least their part to get open, but they can't do anything if the ball's not coming their way. So I agree. Like, I think we all expected to see a heck of a lot more from this passing offense early on, but we are at least starting to see glimmers of it. And I think that we're going to get a much better chance to evaluate the entire operation over the course of the next 7 games. So
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat. I'm at an incomplete right now for
Mhm.
Brown. So let's move on. Man, I didn't realize that we were gonna like go that long doing the overrated, underrated, properly rated. Fill in the blank. With no Notre Dame football game this Saturday, you'll be doing blank.
So I just moved apartments, and I'm going to finish setting everything up and moving all the boxes and unpacking and
I
stuff.
thought your backdrop looked a little different there than it looked last week when you were on. So that must be
Yep.
why.
Yep. We moved. We needed to get a bigger place, and the apartment complex has been pretty awesome with it. So
Yep. Well, I will not be moving. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about that. My wife actually got some new furniture last week, and so we
okay.
did like some rearranging and like selling old furniture and stuff last week. So that sets up to be, much more just kind of free time lounging. I think I'll probably watch some college football in the afternoon. My Royals beat the Orioles in the first round of the playoffs. They finished it off, so they're going to play the Yankees. Game 1 is Saturday night. I do wish it was like, maybe 4:30 instead of 6:30 Saturday night, but so I'll be watching a little bit of that Saturday night, and it's like this is always kind of the fun time. October is to me, it's the best sports month. You can flip around. You've got some
Mhm.
baseball playoff games going on. Eventually, you've got the World Series, obviously, college football, NFL, and like for basketball fans, basketball, the NBA is coming back as well. So watch a little college football and then some baseball playoffs Saturday night. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Well, it sounds like you were pretty bummed out that you're not moving this weekend. So if you feel like coming down to Indianapolis and moving some boxes, man,
Just help out.
let me know.
It
We
sounds
got
like
you. We
sounds
got
like
you
a lot
covered.
of fun. Sounds like a lot of fun. Do you buy or sell Miami as the team to beat in the ACC?
I would. I would buy that right now. I think it's between them or Clemson. And right now, I think Miami's the team to beat. Cam Ward is an electric playmaker. So, yeah, I would buy that.
I so we've got we've got a hold, we've got a sell. I still like Clemson. Louisville is really the best team that both of these teams have to play the rest of the way. Miami, after they've got the Cal game Saturday night, then they've got Louisville, Florida State, Duke, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Syracuse. So I mean the schedule like for them is not hard by any stretch, but Clemson's schedule is no harder either. I think they've got Stanford coming up this weekend, and they've got
Yeah.
pretty close to the same schedule. So really, I see them meeting in the ACC title game. And as of right now, I would probably give Clemson the edge. So I'm going to sell on Miami, and I'm going to go with old reliable Clemson to kind of find
Okay.
themselves back in the mix. They sort of fell off the radar after that blowout to Georgia, obviously to open up the season. But I think that they're going to be right back in the mix by the time it's all said and done. Will you stay up for the ACC After Dark matchup between Miami and Cal, 10:30 Saturday night?
Yeah, I will. I'm more of a night owl, anyways.
Oh, to be young.
So, yeah,
You
I'll
and
be up
Brian,
for
the
that
night
one.
owls. That's like for me, I'll be finding myself. That's probably about the time, like the baseball game will be ending. I'll probably try to see if I can stay up a little bit. What always happens with me is like if I'm covering a Notre Dame game and then it's in that time range, whether I come home or I was here covering it or whatever, I'm always a little bit more amped up, and so I can stay up a little, like longer after that. But like 10:30 is going to be pushing it. I'm just being honest. Like I might have to record it or something and see if I can watch some of it the next day. So I'll probably be lucky if I get in the first quarter of that game.
Sure.
Okay, final question tonight. Start, bench, cut. You told me you were a Quentin Tarantino fan, so I've got 3 Tarantino movies for you. Start, bench, cut. Jackie Brown, Inglorious Basterds, Hateful Eight.
So I'm starting Inglorious Basterds because that's one of my favorite movies of all time. Love that movie.
Okay.
I'm going to bench the Hateful Eight, and I think I'm going to cut Jackie Brown.
I've got them in that exact same order. Inglorious Basterds is one that I can watch over and over and over again. It's one of my I'm right there with you. It's become definitely one of my favorites. Hateful Eight has been on a lot on one of the pay channels for the last month, and it's one of those that's like I'll flip over and kind of see where they are, and then maybe watch for 15 20 minutes. It's a long movie though.
It is
incredible how long that movie is.
It's a long movie. I'm a sucker for like Westerns and stuff. So I mean, love Django Unchained, love the Hateful Eight. And there's a movie on Netflix called The Harder They Fall, which is very Quentin Tarantino-esque.
Okay.
I would check that out. It's a really good cast. Idris Elba's in it. It's a good movie. Guilty pleasure movie for sure.
Ooh, that's a bingo. Thank you very much, DK. Yeah, like the some of the lines in Inglorious Basterds, just love it.
Mm-hmm.
Jackie Brown, have you seen Jackie Brown?
So
I know you're a little bit younger, so it was
full
you'd have been really
transparency.
young when it was out.
Full transparency, I have not, which is why I cut it because like I just couldn't. I definitely wasn't going to start it over Inglorious Basterds.
Yeah, to me, it's like one of all of his movies. It's to me probably the least rewatchable of all of them. Honestly, I've seen the others multiple times. I've seen Jackie Brown maybe twice, like when it came out in theaters, and then maybe like one and a half other times. But a lot of people think that it's one of his best as well. I'm just not as up there on Jackie Brown. Well, Trevor, I think that's going to do it for tonight. We covered a lot of topics as usual, and I guess we've got ourselves a long weekend now. We don't have any IB countdown to kickoff coming up tomorrow. We've got no Notre Dame post-game show coming up over the weekend, so I think that this is going to do it. We'll be back on Monday. We've got to kind of figure out where you're going to fit in next week in terms of maybe Tuesdays. I've still got to confirm with Jesse. I was saying before, I think he's going to be able to show up for rapid fire. So it might be like a combination of you or Vince for the first half of the show and then him jumping in for the second. So we'll have to get that figured out next week.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Just let me know. Only thing I have Brian and I are doing the Friday mailbag tomorrow, and then obviously there's no
I forgot about that. All right. Well, Trevor, I appreciate you jumping in. Good to talk to you as always. Good luck with all your moving and unpacking and all that super fun stuff. At least it's not really hot outside. At least it's fall, so it's cooling off a little bit.
If it was hot outside, I think I just wouldn't have moved. If I'm just being 100% honest.
I've moved in July and August more times than I would ever want to admit.
Not for me.
All right. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week on IB Nation Sports Talk.